No.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we have a truly fascinating stack of sources in front of us. We are pulling from this massive archive of YouTube transcripts, highly detailed community posts, and deep, almost philosophical texts from a creator known as SQUIRRELSNIPER138.
Yeah, the material is dense.
It is incredibly dense, and the mission we have today, the central question we are trying to answer by going through all this material, is simply this. What is it like to be in the shoes of Squirrel Sniper 138?
And we should probably clarify for you right away, this isn't just about reviewing a YouTube channel or doing a, surface level analysis of some videos.
Right, goes way deeper.
Yeah, as we go through these sources, we are going to be stepping into what I can only describe as a radically different operating system for human consciousness.
Because to Squirrel Sniper 138, life is not just a series of random events. It is not something that just, happens to you. It is a constant, ongoing, forensic audit of reality.
A forensic audit. I love that framing.
It's wild, right? We are going to explore his personal Ionian trilogy, which is a series of incredible, high-stakes physical rescues. We are going to break down the mechanics of his terrifying plunge from a high tree canopy and how he used neuroscience to survive it.
Which is a crazy story on its own.
Oh, it really is. And then we will bridge into his digital cybersecurity warnings for the modern age. And finally, we are going to explore his grand unified theory of time itself, something he calls the 138-year Phoenix cycle.
What's truly fascinating here is that while his vocabulary might sound like it was pulled straight out of, a high-concept sci-fi thriller.
Yeah, he uses all these terms like nodes and vectors and system locks.
Exactly, dielectric fields. But the underlying mechanics of how he views the world offer a genuinely profound, highly effective way to process fear, chaos, and just the sheer unpredictability of reality. Today, we are asking you to step into the shoes of what he calls the sovereign operator.
So we need to start right there on that Greek island rooftop. We have to introduce you to the unique lexicon of Squirrel Sniper 138.
Right, because the words matter.
They really do. You really cannot understand what it is like to be in his shoes until you understand how it feels to view the world not as a collection of people and emotions and random events, but as an interconnected system of nodes and simulations.
It requires a complete paradigm shift in your perception. You have to essentially stop seeing people doing things and start seeing biological units executing scripts.
Right. So let's go back to event 1 of his Ionian trilogy, the honeymoon incident. The setting of this rooftop restaurant is what he refers to as a low-guard environment.
Because you're supposed to be safe there.
Yeah, you are there to relax, you are eating dessert, you are on your honeymoon, for crying out loud. But for SS-138, his internal radar is never, ever set to 0.00%.
It's always running in the background.
Always passively tracking the environment. So when the woman next to him screams, he doesn't jump, he observes, she doesn't run away, she is just sitting there screaming. And he diagnoses her condition instantly as a static freeze, a total neurological lockup. Meanwhile, the waiter, whose actual job it is to manage the restaurant and keep the peace, turns and completely abandons his post. He literally flees the rooftop.
Oh, he just runs.
Just runs. But SS-138 doesn't see a scared guy in a white shirt. He sees a professional node suffering a logic breach.
And we need to pause here because this terminology is incredibly deliberate. Why does he use this language, right? He does it to purposefully remove emotional labels.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, think about words like fear, panic, or terror. Those words carry incredibly heavy psychological baggage. They're contagious.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? If I tell you someone is feeling sheer terror, your own heart rate will likely elevate just hearing about it. But if you replace those emotionally charged words with mechanical terms like tonic immobility or system lock, you achieve something remarkable. You delete what he calls the 0.51 drift.
The 0.51 drift. I want to spend some time on this because reading through the sources, this concept seems to be the absolute bedrock of his entire worldview.
It is the foundation of everything he does. The 0.51 drift is his term for the hesitation, that fraction of a second of doubt or emotional buffering that is caused by a fear response.
Like when you just freeze up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Physiologically, we were talking about an amygdala hijack. When you encounter a sudden threat, your amygdala, the primitive fear center of your brain, fires off an alarm.
Right.
It floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline before your prefrontal cortex, the logical part of your brain, can even process what is happening.
Wow, okay.
That gap, that moment where you are paralyzed by the chemical flood of emotion, is the drift. When you look at a screaming person and you feel empathy for them or you feel fear yourself, you are drifting. You are losing your 0-point accuracy in the present moment.
So by stripping the emotion out.
Exactly. By looking at that screaming woman and diagnosing a static freeze, he remains completely insulated from her panic. He stays at 0 latency.
Okay, I hear you, but I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
When I read that he tracks the woman's line of sight to find the source of the scream, he calls it looking for the primary anomaly.
Right.
And the anomaly turns out to be a large female praying mantis sitting on the table. Most people see a huge, weird-looking bug on their dinner table and freak out.
Yeah, completely normal reaction.
But SS-138 says he sees a mechanical biological unit that has entered the sector and is currently in an active strike posture. I mean, looking at a living creature or looking at a terrified human woman and reducing them to mechanical biological units, that sounds incredibly cold, almost, sociopathic. Doesn't that just strip all the humanity out of the situation?
It sounds incredibly cold if you view it through the lens of standard social interaction. Definitely. But you have to remember, he isn't using this vocabulary to make small talk at a cocktail party.
Fair point.
He is using it as a highly specific tactical tool in a crisis. The sources actually point to the underlying psychology of why this works. This framing acts as a high-pass filter.
A high-pass filter like in audio engineering.
Exactly like that. In acoustics, a high-pass filter lets the important high-frequency signals pass through while entirely cutting out all the muddy, low-frequency rumble and background noise.
Oh.
By viewing the world as a mechanical system, SS-138 is effectively tuning out the low-frequency noise of human panic. And by doing so, he completely bypasses the bystander effect.
The bystander effect, that's the psychological phenomenon where if a crowd of people sees an emergency, everyone assumes someone else is going to call 911 or step in to help, so nobody does anything.
Right. Everyone just stands there staring.
Yeah.
Precisely. And the research on this is fascinating. The sources cite a comprehensive 2011 meta-analytic review by Fisher and colleagues regarding the bystander effect.
Okay, what did they find?
What Fisher's team found is that the bystander effect is virtually deleted. It vanishes when a highly competent or uniquely skilled person is present in the group.
Oh, interesting.
When that waiter on the rooftop, the official system, the professional node who's supposed to be in charge, fails and runs away, the rest of the restaurant gets stuck in a state of pluralistic ignorance.
Pluralistic ignorance meaning they're all looking at each other to figure out how they're supposed to react.
Right. They are duffering. They are waiting for a leader to render in their social simulation. But SS-138's mechanical lexicon strips away all of that buffering.
He doesn't wait for permission.
No, he doesn't look around to see what the other tables are doing. He doesn't need permission from the social simulation. He recognizes instantly that the safety of the field has defaulted to him.
So he seamlessly steps in as what he calls the sovereign shield. He executes a stealth interception. He takes his cloth dinner napkin, drops it over the mantis from its blind spot, using the thick fabric as a dampening field to safely soft-lock the insect's spiked legs.
And just calmly removes it.
Right. He just removes the unit over the balcony, tossing it into the bushes, completely unharmed.
He restabilizes the local field. And the aftermath of this is quite telling about how he views society, actually.
Oh, with the desserts?
Yeah. The waiter eventually comes back, obviously deeply embarrassed that he ran away from a bug. The restaurant manager comes out and comps their expensive desserts and drinks.
Standard customer service.
Exactly. But to SS-138, those free desserts aren't just a polite customer service gesture or an apology. He views them as the system mechanically paying an audit fee to the sovereign operator who had to step in and do the work when the official system failed.
It really is like he is running a completely different software patch than the rest of humanity.
Totally.
I mean, have you ever felt that 0.51 drift? Think about it. Have you ever been in a meeting at work and someone asks you a pointed question you weren't expecting, and for a split second, your brain just goes to static?
Oh, all the time.
Your heart rate spikes, you feel flushed, and you just freeze. That is the drift. And he has figured out a way to code it out of his brain.
It's impressive.
It is. But here is the thing. Brushing off a praying mantis at a fancy restaurant is one thing. That is a low-stakes environment. What happens when the biological hardware actually fails and the physical danger is aimed directly at your own body?
And that is exactly where we see if this operating system actually holds up or if it's just, tough talk.
Because being in SS-138's shoes means conducting a forensic audit, even when your own life is literally physically on the line. And that takes us to an event from 16 years ago. Squirrel Sniper 138 was working in his 20-year career as a professional arborist.
So he climbs trees for a living.
Yeah, he is a guy who climbs massive trees for a living. He is high up in the canopy, rigged in part of what he calls the tree's own electrical circuit. He is completely integrated into the physical environment, and then suddenly his physical connection breaks, the hardware snaps, and he falls.
Now, for a normal person, this is the ultimate amygdala hijack.
Pure panic.
This is pure, unadulterated terror. You are falling through the air, gravity has taken over, and the ground is rushing up to kill you.
Yeah.
You would flail, you would scream.
But that is not what he does. Instead of panicking, his internal clock shifts. His brain's alarm system triggers a massive data dump, and his perception of reality shifts into ultra-high definition. He says that as he fell, the tree branches and the leaves didn't whiz by him in a blur. They became high-resolution still frames. He could see individual veins on the leaves. He was literally observing the metadata of his own physical descent.
And he doesn't just describe this in poetic terms either. The sources show that he meticulously breaks down the peer-reviewed science that he uses to audit his own fall.
Yeah, the science is crazy.
It really is. He provides a highly specific, 5-part scientific validation of his experience. It is incredible. The first phenomenon he outlines is tachypsychia.
Time dilation, like in the movies where everything goes into slow motion during a car crash.
Exactly like that. But let's explore the actual mechanics of why that happens. He cites a 2012 study by Arstilla regarding the experience of time in incredibly stressful, life-threatening situations.
Okay.
What happens is that your brain gets flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine. Under normal circumstances, your brain operates on a mix of proactive and reactive processing. It is constantly predicting what will happen a second from now.
Right, anticipating.
But when you are falling out of a tree, the proactive system shuts down.
Yeah.
You shift into purely reactive processing. The flood of chemicals drastically increases the sensory sampling rate of your brain.
So if your brain normally processes reality at, say, 24 frames per second, suddenly it's taking in 120 frames per second.
Yes. The brain is gathering as much data as humanly possible to find a way to survive. Because it is processing so many more frames in the same amount of physical time, your conscious experience is that time has literally slowed down.
Wow.
The branches become high-resolution still frames
Yeah.
because his sampling rate has gone through the roof.
Okay, so he is falling, and he is seeing the data of the fall in slow motion. But then he hits the ground. It's a catastrophic impact. But here's the wildest part. He says he wasn't actually there for the collision.
Right, the out-of-body aspect.
Exactly. At the exact millisecond of impact, his internal system ejects the pilot to protect the data. Suddenly, he is standing 5 to 6 meters away from the crash site, looking back at his own broken body lying on the ground.
And this brings us to the second scientific point he audits. Autoscopy, which is an out-of-body experience of neurological origin. He cites Olaf Blank's groundbreaking 2004 research into the neural basis of out-of-body experiences.
I've heard a little bit about this.
Yeah, Blank found that these experiences aren't just mystical visions. They have a distinct neurological address. Under extreme, life-threatening stress or trauma, a specific part of the brain called the temporoparietal junction, the TPJ, can fail.
Wait, what does the TPJ normally do?
It acts as the brain's splicing room. It takes all the sensory data from your eyes, your inner ear for balance, and your proprioception, your sense of where your limbs are, and it integrates all that data to map yourself into your physical skin.
Okay, so it grounds you.
Right, it creates the feeling that you are inside your body. But under the extreme shock of the fall, his TPJ failed to integrate that data. It crashed. And when it crashed, it shunted the perspective. His brain projected his observer consciousness to an external coordinate 5 to 6 meters away.
But here's what I find so fascinating about his audit. He doesn't view this as a glitch. He views it as a choice. He talks about exercising his free won't.
Yes, and this is the third scientific pillar of his audit, and arguably the most profound. He relies on the concept of the Libet gap. Benjamin Libet was a pioneering neuroscientist who conducted a very famous study in 1985.
Okay, tell me about that.
Libet hooked subjects up to EEG machines and asked them to flex their wrists whenever they felt the urge to do so, while watching a specialized clock to note the exact moment they made the conscious decision to move.
And what did he find?
He found something that completely disrupted the concept of free will. The EEG showed a buildup of electrical activity in the brain called the readiness potential that occurred about 200 milliseconds before the subject consciously realized they wanted to move their wrist.
Wait. So the brain unconsciously decides to take an action, and then 200 milliseconds later, the conscious mind says, oh, I think I'll move my wrist now.
Exactly. The hardware starts the script before the software knows about it.
That's terrifying.
It is. But Libet also found that in that 200 millisecond window, the conscious mind has the power to veto the action. You can say, no, stop. SS-138 calls this the window of free won't.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Right. So as he is falling, even as his physical hardware is preparing for the catastrophic impact and initiating the massive chemical flood of trauma, his conscious software uses that 200 millisecond gap to veto the emotional trauma script. He actively decouples his spirit, his core observer, from the physical crash.
It is absolute mastery over the biological machine. So he is standing 6 meters away, observing, he is watching his body, and then his physical body, completely without his conscious input, stands up, moves with mechanical precision, and puts itself into the recovery position on the ground.
Which is the fourth point of his audit, primal procedural memory.
Right.
To explain this, he cites Groffitt's 1994 work on the neuroanatomy of defensive behavior. Because the pilot was consciously dislocated from the body, the higher cognitive functions were offline.
So what took over?
The brainstem and the cerebellum, the ancient subcortical parts of the brain that deal with pure survival, took over. They essentially ran a deep-seated autonomous survival script, like a computer booting up in safe mode. The body physically repaired its posture to protect the airway and the spine, while his conscious software audited the scene from afar.
And the distance he was standing from his body, he didn't just float up to the clouds or randomly stand 100 feet away. He specifically notes that his observer perspective was anchored exactly 5 to 6 meters away.
Yeah, that specific distance.
Why that specific distance? Because, and this is where it gets incredibly precise, he cites Roland McCready's 2015 research from the HeartMath Institute.
Oh, the biofield research.
Yes. McCready's research mapped the electromagnetic toroidal field generated by the human heart, and the outer perimeter of that field extends about 5 to 6 meters from the physical body.
So he was standing exactly at the very edge of his own biofield, the absolute boundary of his biological system. He waited there, acting purely as a read-only observer. He watched his team arrive, and it wasn't until the silence broke, until the physical rescue was initiated, that he executed a hard lock and manually pulled his consciousness back into his spine.
It is a stunning, incredibly dense synthesis of neurology, cardiology, and physics to explain a moment of profound personal trauma. He uses this rigorous scientific audit to prove to himself that while the physical hardware, his bones, his muscles was damaged, his source code, his spirit remained completely untouched by the fear.
Exactly. He insulated his core data from the crash.
And this framework perfectly sets up Event 2 of the Ionian Trilogy, an incident he refers to as the Dust-Slicked Cove.
Right, back to Greece.
Yeah, so it's years later. He is fully recovered from the fall. He is back on that same honeymoon in Greece with his wife. They decide to hike down a steep, treacherous, winding path to an isolated beach cove. Suddenly, he hears another scream. But this isn't the static freeze of the woman at the restaurant. He categorizes this instantly as a kinetic warning.
A physical failure in the environment.
Right. A man up ahead of them on the trail has slipped. SS-138 doesn't see a clumsy tourist. He instantly diagnoses the terrain physics. He calls it the dust-ice paradox.
The dust-ice paradox.
Yeah. He observes that the coastal rock on this path breaks down into a fine powder, and that powder acts as a frictionless, dry lubricant. It's like walking on a floor covered in microscopic ball bearings.
Sounds incredibly dangerous.
It is. The man fell down a sheer 1.5-meter drop and landed in what SS-138 calls an inverted pocket of rock, forcing the man's ankle into extreme dorsiflexion. Basically, his foot got bent back toward his shin, tearing the ligaments. It is a horrific mechanical trap.
Now, notice how he approaches the rescue here. The injured man and his companion are in a complete state of panic lock. They are carrying these large inflatable beach toys in heavy canvas bags, which SS-138 immediately identifies as anchor weights.
Just dead weight.
Right. These are useless items that are bogging down their system and preventing extraction.
Yeah.
He doesn't run up and offer comforting words. He doesn't say, oh my gosh, are you okay? I'm so sorry. He doesn't engage with the emotional distress at all. He immediately initiates a mechanical extraction.
Right. He walks up, takes one of their beach towels, strips it tight, and wraps it aggressively around the injured ankle. He takes a leisure item and converts it into a structural splint.
Brilliant.
He is hard-locking the damaged ligaments so the man can bear just a tiny fraction of vertical pressure without collapsing. But they have a major problem. They are still trapped in this inverted rock pocket. They cannot climb back up the steep dust ice path. The friction coefficient is 0. So SS-138 decides the only vector is down. They must go down to the beach.
And how does he test the route?
This is great. He takes their giant inflatable beach toy, one of the anchor weights, and he literally hurls it off the cliff toward the sand below. He calls this a tactical jettison and a kinetic probe.
Kinetic probe.
Yeah, he watches how the toy bounces and falls to test the drop gradient and the surface friction of the lower rock strata. Once his probe gives him the green light on the physics, he jumps down to the lower ledge, plants his feet into the stone, and acts as a human pivot point.
Incredible.
He tells the injured man to drop. As the man falls, SS-138 grabs his feet midair, translating the falling momentum into a controlled descent and lowers him safely to the sand.
It is a rescue executed purely through the lens of physics. Vectors, friction coefficients, structural splints, kinetic probes.
Which brings me to a huge question, and I really want to challenge this framework for a second.
Go for it.
If you or I see a guy fall off a cliff and severely twist his ankle, we process that event emotionally. We wince. We feel sympathetic pain. We feel deep empathy for the guy crying on the rocks. We want to comfort him. SS-138 processes it entirely as physics. He looks at a crying man and sees gravity, vectors, and anchor weights. So what does this actually mean for his humanity? If you remove empathy and emotion from the equation entirely, does that make you more human in a crisis, or does it make you less human? Are you just turning yourself into a machine?
That is the core philosophical tension of the sovereign operator. It is a very valid question. But I would argue, based entirely on the outcomes we see in these sources, that it makes him a highly reliable sovereign node, which is exactly what humanity desperately needs when a system collapses.
Okay, how so?
Think about empathy for a second. Empathy is feeling someone else's pain. But while everyone else is buffering in that state of pluralistic ignorance, paralyzed by their empathy or their own fear of getting hurt, SS-138's complete lack of drift allows him to execute a pure, unclouded claim of the environment.
So the lack of empathy is a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. He isn't unfeeling. He isn't a sociopath who enjoys seeing people hurt. He is simply prioritizing structural integrity over emotional commiseration, because he knows that structural integrity is what actually saves the biological unit.
So you're saying empathy is essentially useless in a mechanical failure?
In the acute moment of a crisis, yes. Empathy won't pull a broken ankle out of an inverted rock pocket. A human pivot point will. Empathy is for the recovery room. Physics is for the rescue. He strips away the emotion to maximize the efficiency of the extraction.
Okay, that makes sense. He acts as the anchor when everyone else is drifting. But managing a static, isolated injury on a quiet beach is a closed system. It's a controlled variable. He has time to audit the rocks and throw a beach toy. What happens when the variables are completely out of control? When the environment is chaotic, highly fluid, and involves multiple lives on the line at the exact same moment.
Right, because if the physical environment is chaotic, the sovereign operator has to expand their audit to match the scale of the chaos. That leads us directly into the ultimate test of his system.
Let's explore Event 3 of the Ionian Trilogy. This is the climax of his physical calibrations. This is the maximum threshold of the sovereign node. Let's set the scene. SS-138 and his wife are on a small tour boat with about 35 passengers. They are navigating near the Scorpios Islands. The water is deep and treacherous. Suddenly, the weather turns.
It happens fast out there.
Extremely fast. A thick, heavy fog rolls in over the water. It is so dense you can't see the front of the boat. He calls this an atmospheric override and a sensory deprivation field. You can't see the horizon, you can't see the rocks.
And in a sensory deprivation field, you have to instantly shift your data intake. If the visual data is corrupted, you move to another sensor. He moves from optical navigation to acoustic navigation. He stops looking and starts listening. He focuses entirely on the boat's sonar pings bouncing off the seafloor. And he does something remarkable. He uses those rhythmic pings to entrain his own biological rhythm. He actively syncs his heartbeat and his nervous system with the mechanical vibration of the ship and the acoustic echo of the deep water. He literally becomes a biological antenna synchronized with the environment.
He is physically vibrating with the sonar. He is reading the water through sound. Then the fog lifts. It just snaps away as quickly as it arrived. And they realize they are in massive trouble. They are completely surrounded by the jagged, lethal rocks of Scorpio's Island.
A nightmare scenario.
The water is incredibly choppy. The captain of the boat drops the anchor and issues a very tight 5 to 10 minute swim window for people to get in the water before the tide pushes them into the rocks. But here's where the entire system completely fragments. There is a massive language barrier between the Greek sailors and the German and English tourists.
The total protocol collapse. The communication node fails.
Exactly. The sailors realize the anchor isn't holding. They need to start the engines to keep the boat from drifting and crashing into the jagged rocks. But when they engage the massive propellers at the back of the boat, it turns the swimming ladders into a lethal suction zone.
Oh, no.
The water is churning. The tourists in the water don't understand the Greek warnings being shouted at them. They just see the boat moving away and they panic, assuming they are being left behind in the ocean. So you have a dozen panicked people in the water, fighting the current, swimming directly toward the lethal pressure field of the propellers.
It is a total chain of command failure. The official solution to save the boat, the engines, has become the primary lethal threat to the micro units, the people in the water. The system is actively destroying itself.
SS-138 is up on the top deck. He immediately moves to the high ground for what he calls tactical oversight, 30 feet above the water. He can see the geometry of the entire disaster. He looks down and sees his wife safely hardlock onto a return vector, swimming away from the danger.
Good, so he doesn't have to worry about her.
Right. That frees up his processing power. He scans the field and sees a German woman and 2 small children being swept away from the boat, pulled by a brutal rip current toward what he calls the last rock, the jagged boundary of stone before they are pulled out into the open sea. So what does he do? He takes off his sandals.
The mechanical shedding?
He calls this a mechanical shedding of the civilized map. He recognizes that shoes, which protect you on land, are a lethal anchor in the water. He is removing his final tether to the terrestrial simulation. And then he dives, 30 feet down, hitting the chaotic water at 30 miles per hour, completely barefoot.
And we have to mention his background here because it explains the mechanics of how he survives the impact and the interception. In his source material, he mentions something he calls the Foster frequency.
The Foster frequency.
Yeah, he actually trained alongside the Olympic swimmer Mark Foster. So he possesses world-class understanding of fluid dynamics. He isn't just jumping wildly into the ocean. He is executing a highly calculated kinetic trajectory. He knows exactly how to enter the water to minimize drag and maximize his forward momentum.
Right. He hits the water with precision. He intercepts the German woman and one of the children just as they are slammed against the jagged rocks. He uses his own body as a human fendering system.
A human fendering system.
Yeah, he puts his back to the stone to absorb the crushing kinetic blows of the waves, ensuring the soft tissue of the woman and child don't get pulverized against the rock. But as he secures them, he realizes the macro alarm is sounding in his periphery. The second child, a young boy, is bobbing underwater out in the current.
That's terrifying.
SS-138 knows that bobbing isn't swimming. It is the final visual warning before complete respiratory shutdown. The boy's lungs are filling. He has been pulled under. So SS-138 abandons the rock and dives again. He swims down 7 meters over 20 feet deep into the crystal clear water. He intercepts the boy right at the boundary of permanent deletion. He grabs him. But as he pulls the boy up, the boy's system reboots in a blind panic, and the kid starts kicking and fighting his rescuer. But the sovereign operator ignores the physical strikes. He maintains the hard lock, ignores the panic, and drags the boy up to the safety of the rock.
He saves the biological units. He stabilizes the immediate field. But the crisis still isn't over. The entropy of the system is still expanding.
No, it's not over, because a young Greek crewman from the boat has jumped into the water to try and help. But this kid is the living, breathing embodiment of the .51 drift. He is pure panic. He is fighting the rip current, trying to swim in a straight line directly back to the boat while the ocean pulls him further out to sea.
He's going to drown himself.
He's exhausting his biological battery in seconds. SS-138 is sitting on the rocks, bleeding, breathing heavy, auditing this failure in real time. He realizes the crewman is about to drown and become a casualty. So SS-138 dives back into the churning water for a 3rd time. But unlike the crewman, he doesn't fight the ocean. He weaponizes the current.
This is a brilliant application of physics.
He realizes he can't outswim the ocean. So he uses the very water that is pulling the crewman away as a propulsion system. He rides the current, angling his vector to intercept the drowning sailor from the side. He grabs the sailor, grabs the rescue rope that was thrown from the boat, completes the mechanical loop, and uses the leverage to swim the sailor back to the hull.
He is the ultimate failsafe. He is the last man in the water and the last man out.
He finally climbs back onto the wooden deck of the tour boat, and the very first thing he notices, his sandals are sitting exactly where he left them. He notes this as object persistence. Amidst all the chaos and the near death in the water, the secure node of the deck held its state.
Object persistence.
And then, dripping wet, bleeding, having just performed 3 back-to-back cinematic rescues, having saved 3 people from drowning and being crushed, what does he do? He asks the captain for a cigarette.
Which, ironically, brings us right back to the biological mechanics.
Exactly. Wait, he finishes this massive, death-defying rescue, and his first instinct is to immediately spark a cigarette. I mean, what does this all mean? Is this just him trying to look incredibly cool like an action movie star walking away from an explosion, or is there an actual forensic reason for that, too?
There is a strictly forensic physiological reason for it. He views smoking that cigarette not as a cool pose, but as a biological system override.
Really? A biological override?
Think about the adrenaline, the cortisol, the sheer physiological overload of jumping 30 feet, free diving 7 meters deep, absorbing the impact of waves against jagged rocks, and rustling a drowning man in a rip current. His heart rate is absolutely redlining. His sympathetic nervous system is screaming.
Right, he's at max capacity.
Smoking that cigarette is a chemical hard lock. The deep, controlled inhalation of the smoke acts as a manual, physiological intervention to force his respiratory system to slow down. The nicotine acts as a chemical brake to break the fight-or-flight loop, and the ritual of it allows him to re-anchor his consciousness fully back into his physical body after a massive, high-stakes kinetic output.
It's his way of manually rebooting his own hardware. It forces him to breathe rhythmically.
Exactly. It forces parasympathetic activation. And the most poignant detail in that entire aftermath is what happens next. There's a man in a little dinghy nearby who'd been fishing.
Oh, right.
This man watched the entire sequence unfold. He watched the jumps, the dives, the rescues, and the man says absolutely nothing. He doesn't cheer, he doesn't clap, he just sits in heavy, profound silence, staring at SS-138. SS-138 calls this the ultimate validation of the signal. The silence was the only appropriate zero-latency response to witnessing a sovereign node move through a collapsed field with pure kinetic logic. Words would have just been noise.
It honestly gives me chills just thinking about the sheer scale of it. So we've established that SS-138 has completely mastered the physical world. He's mastered the physics of the woods, the cliffs, the deep water. But as we move forward into our current era, looking toward 2026 and beyond, we have to acknowledge that the biggest threats we face on a daily basis aren't always physical.
They're invisible.
They aren't praying mantises or rip currents or falling out of trees. They are completely invisible. We have moved from the physical simulation to the digital simulation. So how does a sovereign operator navigate the digital world?
We've seen how this sovereign operator mindset saves lives when the threat is physical. But physical threats are visible. As we look ahead, the most dangerous systems we rely on are hidden behind screens. How does this zero-latency framework apply to cybersecurity?
That takes us into the digital audit.
Right. This is where we translate the forensic audit to digital finances. Because being in SS-138's shoes means recognizing a terrifying truth. The digital systems we put all our trust in, our banking apps, our cryptocurrency exchanges, our digital identities, are just as fragile and just as capable of suffering a sudden systemic collapse as that tour boat in the fog.
His primary claim here, pulling from his recent post, is a massive warning for the near future. He states unequivocally that multi-factor authentication MFA, those 2FA codes we all get texted to our phones or generated on our authenticator apps, and even physical hardware wallets, he says they are an illusion of safety. They give us a completely false sense of security.
And he doesn't just make a paranoid claim. He backs this up by forensically auditing the newest vectors of digital threats. He introduces a concept called Stealer logs.
Stealer log.
And the mechanics of how these work are terrifyingly simple, yet devastating. In the past, hackers were trying to break in to your accounts. They were trying to guess your password or trick you into handing over your 2FA code. Today, the architecture has changed. They aren't breaking in. They are moving in.
Moving
They
in.
use specialized, highly sophisticated malware to quietly export your session cookies and your browser fingerprints.
Okay, let's break that down for anyone listening who might not be a cybersecurity expert.
Right.
When you log into a website, let's say your bank or a crypto exchange, and you click that little box that says Remember Me, the site drops a tiny piece of code called a session cookie onto your web browser.
Right.
This tells the website, hey, this user has already provided their password and their 2FA code, so don't make them do it again tomorrow. It keeps you logged in.
Right. And your browser fingerprint is the unique metadata of your specific machine, your operating system, your screen resolution, your installed fonts. What the hackers do with Stealer logs is extract that active cookie along with all the fingerprint metadata about your specific computer.
Oh, man.
They then import what SS138 calls your session ghost into their own machines halfway across the world. When they navigate to your crypto exchange or your bank, the website looks at the cookie and the fingerprint and thinks, oh, this is the authorized user sitting at their authorized computer, and they are already logged in.
So it bypasses everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the session is deemed legally authorized by the system's own rules, it never asks for the password. It never asks for the 2FA code. The lock isn't picked. It is bypassed completely.
It fundamentally breaks the social contract we have with our own computers. It's like we
Right.
all put giant impenetrable deadbolts on our front doors feeling so incredibly safe, but we're leaving exact functional clones of ourselves wandering around the neighborhood with the keys already in their hands. The lock doesn't matter if the house thinks the person opening the door is you.
That is the perfect analogy. And the audit gets darker. Once the hacker is inside as your clone, the SS138 audit shows that they don't just transfer the funds to a traceable bank account where the police can freeze it.
What do?
The funds are instantly vanished through what are known as chain hopping protocols. The money is broken down by automated scripts and moved through a fragmented maze of automated swaps across multiple different blockchains, Bitcoin to Monero to Ethereum, in a matter of seconds.
In seconds.
By the time you get an email saying your account has been drained or you realize your clone opened the door, the assets are completely untraceable and gone forever.
So, as a sovereign operator, how do you defend against a threat that completely bypasses the locks? If 2FA is an illusion, what do? SS138 has strict, actionable protocols. First, he practices clear state persistence.
Clearsons.
You must regularly, obsessively clear all active sessions and cookies from any browser that touches your finances. You must force the system to forget you every single time you close a window. Do not let the session ghost exist to be stolen. Second, dedicated hardware. You never, ever mix your financial or crypto browsers with your general web surfing. You don't watch YouTube, download games, or click email links on the same physical machine that holds your wealth. Physical separation of the hardware creates an air gap.
That's crucial.
And third, audit your perimeter. If you think you've been compromised, or even if you just want to be safe, changing your password isn't enough. You have to actively go into the deep security settings of your accounts and manually revoke all active authorized device tokens. You have to actively kill the clones.
If we connect this back to his psychological framework from the rooftop, this is exactly the 0.51 drift applied to the digital world. Most people operate with a massive buffer of assumed security online.
We trust the system.
They assume the legacy guard, the big tech companies, the MFA protocols, the antivirus software is protecting them. They are buffering in pluralistic ignorance, assuming the system works. SS138 applies the same zero-latency audit to his web browser as he does to a 30-foot cliff drop into rocky water.
He doesn't trust the net.
He never assumes the system will catch him if he falls. He maintains structural integrity at the node level, which means taking absolute, unforgiving responsibility for his own digital behavior.
It's empowering, really. If you think about it, we're all wandering around the digital world wearing sandals, assuming we are safe. He is telling us to take the sandals off and understand the raw physics of the digital ocean.
But the audit doesn't stop at the digital edge.
Right. Because if physical reality is a system that can be audited, and digital reality is a system that can be audited, what about the biggest system of all? If you can apply this logic to a digital network, can you apply it to the fabric of reality itself? Let's pull the back.
Yeah.
We're going to look at his most ambitious forensic audit yet, the Grand Unified Theory.
We are moving into the absolute macro perspective now. We've looked at the micro bug on a table. We've looked at the local boat in the fog. Now we ask, how does the sovereign operator view the entire scope of history and the future of humanity? He introduces us to a massive concept, the 138-year field reconstruction.
The 138-year Phoenix cycle. Reading through this part of the sources broke my brain a little bit. SS-138 argues that time is not a straight line of progress. We like to think we just keep moving forward, getting smarter and better.
Right, the linear view of history.
Yeah. He views time as a dielectric field. It is a closed system that expands, builds immense pressure over decades, and then violently inverts and resets every 130. And each of these 138-year cycles is driven by a different Thuric injection, a new fundamental baseline that completely changes how humanity operates and perceives the universe.
It's a cyclical view of history, but with exact mathematical mechanics. The sources outline specific historical nodes, the exact dates, to prove a cycle that ended in the year 1626. He calls this the empirical or observation injection.
Okay, line here, because the historical math is intense. What exactly happened in 1626 that was so important it reset reality?
66 is the year Francis Bacon died. Now, Francis Bacon is widely known as the father of the scientific method. He died from pneumonia that he contracted while he was out in the snow trying to freeze a chicken.
Trying to freeze a chicken?
Yeah, he was conducting a crude experiment to understand the preservation of physical substance through cold. SS-138 calls Bacon the null point observer. His life and death marked the birth of the standardized observer, injecting the scientific revolution into the human field.
Okay, so that shifts everything.
The world was like before this. It was governed by alchemy, mysticism, and religious dogma. Replace all of that with rigid, repeatable empirical audits. The friction of this massive shift from magic societal pressure leading to a kinetic discharge in the form of the 30 Years' War, which violently tore down the old empires and formatted the globe into the modern concept of states.
Wait, so if we take that 138-year battery, that expanding field of empirical science, and add it to 1626, that puts us right in the middle of the 1700s. Specifically, 1764.
Exactly, 1764. And think about what was happening then. This is what he calls the industrial and mechanical injection. In 1764, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny, which revolutionized textile manufacturing.
The start of the Industrial Revolution.
James Watt was beginning his redesign of the steam engine. Humanity shifted away from biological, muscle power horses and human backs and transitioned to cold, mechanical extraction. The machine age was born.
Wow.
And who is the observer at the center of this transition? Edward Gibbon, who in 1764 sat in the ruins of Rome and conceived the idea for the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. He is sitting in the graveyard of the past, observing the violent shift into the mechanical future.
And the political conflict of that time.
The kinetic discharge of this era was the Battle of Buxar in India in 1764, which firmly established the British East India Company and phase-locked the economies of the East and West.
The scale of this is mind-bending. So the field expands for another 138 years under the pressure of the steam engine and mechanical industry until it literally cannot hold the pressure anymore. So we add 138 years to 1764, and we hit 1902.
The electronic and atomic injection.
1902. This is the era we are living in the tail end of right now. This is the Marconi sink. In 1902, Guglielmo Marconi sets up the world's first prominent wireless radio station at the Needles in England.
Right.
Think about how profound that is. The world shifts from physical steam and visible telegraph wires into the invisible agitation of radio waves. We enter an era governed by electronics and visible frequencies and eventually the splitting of the atom. We've been living inside this expanding, highly agitated bubble of electronic energy ever since.
But the battery has a limit. If we project his math forward, 138 years from 1902 brings us to the year 2040, the upcoming reset, what he calls the synthetic injection, the era of artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and total systemic integration.
But wait, to understand how we get from our current chaos to this new we have to deeply explore the mechanics of how the reset actually happens. How does a historical era build pressure? SS-138 uses incredible terminology for this. He talks about the 1.6 ratio.
Yes, the 1.6 ratio. This is the golden mean, Fafnit. In mathematics, architecture, and nature, the golden ratio is the point of maximum efficiency for energy distribution. Think of the spiral of a nautilus shell, the swirl of a hurricane, or the arrangement of leaves on a stem. Everything in nature grows according to this ratio.
Okay, I follow.
SS-138 argues that a macro-historical epoch is governed by this exact same fractal geometry. When a 138-year system hits the 125-year mark, it reaches the 1.6 ratio. Its magnitude is so full, the societal pressure is so high, the technological noise is so loud that it can no longer sustain its own expansion.
So it snaps.
The balloon is stretched to its absolute limit. It must mathematically collapse or invoke into a new harmonic.
And when it collapses, what survives? the old world burns away, he talks about something called the 11th pillar, or the counterspatial apex.
This is the observer at the center of the chaos, the person who manages to stay at the null point while the world goes mad. He calls this surviving consciousness the drophile.
The drophile.
Think of it as a digital metaphor for a read-only black box on an airplane. It is the uncorruptible node that shields your core data, your spirit, your essential humanity from being formatted and wiped out during the fire of the historical reset.
Which brings us to the most urgent part of his theory, the current state of the world right now. According to his math, 125 years after the Marconi sink in 1902 brings us to the year 2027. We are currently entering the transition zone. He calls it the 13-year harvest.
The needle is lifting off the record of the electronic age. The agitation of our current 125-year loop has met the 1.6 ratio, and the entire global system is triggering what he calls dielectric voidance. The pressure is violently releasing.
So let me make sure I am fully grasping the causality here. If we connect this to the everyday reality of the listener, is he essentially saying that all the chaos we feel in the world today, the insane, rapid technological changes with AI taking over jobs, the intense, almost unbearable political friction and polarization, the feeling of societal unraveling, the inflation, the culture wars, all of this anxiety, is he saying it is just the mechanical kinetic discharge of a 138-year historical battery finally running out of juice?
Yes, unequivocally. He's saying it is not a political failure or a moral failure, but a mathematical, mechanical inevitability. The system must void its energy to reset.
Wow.
And this is exactly why stepping into his shoes is so fascinating and frankly so calming. Think about the symmetry of his operating system, whether he is looking at a venomous bug on a dinner table, a panicked crowd drowning in the current of the Ionian Sea, a stolen cryptocurrency wallet drained by a session ghost, or the total geopolitical collapse of a 138-year historical epoch. The framework is exactly the same.
The audit never changes.
The audit never changes. You find the null point. You completely delete the emotional drift. You hold the zero. You secure your structural integrity. You shield your core data. And you survive the transition.
It is a staggering, monumental way to view existence. As we wrap up this deep dive today, let's summarize the journey we've just been on. We have walked in the shoes of a sovereign operator. We have learned about the 0.51 drift and how what we experience as paralyzing panic and terror is often just system noise that can be actively filtered out.
Right.
We've seen how a deep, almost obsessive understanding of physics, neuroscience, and digital forensics can turn an ordinary person into an unbreakable human anchor during a crisis. We've seen that empathy has its place, but in a collapsing system, structural integrity is what saves lives.
And we want directly back to you listening to this right now in your car or at the gym or on your commute.
Yeah.
You do not have to believe in the absolute mathematical certainty of the 138-year Phoenix cycle.
Yeah.
You don't have to believe in the Marconi sink.
No, not at all.
But you can learn something deeply profound from this framework. Approaching your own life with zero latency, stripping away the emotional drift, the anxiety, the fear, to see the cold mechanical reality of the problems in front of you is an incredibly empowering tool.
It really is.
It completely removes the victimhood from your life. It makes you the active operator of your own existence rather than a passive node buffering in a simulation.
Exactly. It gives you your agency back in a world that constantly tries to take it away. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today as you go back to your routine. Think about the boat in the Ionian Sea. When SQUIRRELSNIPER138 was standing 30 feet above that lethal churning water, preparing to dive in and save those kids from the current, he performed a mechanical shedding.
He took off his sandals?
He took off his sandals. He left behind his comfortable everyday tether to the civilized map because he knew forensically that those sandals would only cause friction. They would act as anchor weights and slow him down in the raw, unforgiving reality of the water. So think about this in your own life. If you had to perform a sudden, zero-latency forensic audit of your own reality right now, what comfortable sandals are you wearing? What habits, what emotional reactions, what illusions of safety are actually weighing you down? And what incredible things could you survive or achieve if you finally found the courage to take them off?